The Department of Veterans Affairs has new protocols in place to ensure no vets looking for mental health support are given advice on medically assisted dying.
If a veteran brings it up to a caseworker, the caseworker is instructed to bring it immediately to the supervisor, and the supervisor deals with it. It's an issue that's to be dealt with, as I said, between the doctor and the patient, and that's the way it must be.
All right, as first reported by Global News, several veterans have come forward over the last month, and they say they received counseling from at least one Veterans Affairs caseworker on medically assisted dying. So what more should the government be doing to support veterans? Erin O'Toole is a former Veterans Affairs Minister, a former leader of the Conservative Party, and he's with me now. Mr. O'Toole, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
It's good to be back.
You've raised these kinds of issues in the past when this was first being debated in 2016 about these specific concerns for veterans. What do you make of these new protocols that it's got to go to a supervisor right away? Is that strong enough?
Well, no, it's not strong enough. We should not have medical assistance in dying for someone with a treatable condition. And post-traumatic stress injury or operational stress injuries, depression, many veterans will get this as a result of their service to Canada. And when they're calling an assistance line to get claims or support or to get faster counseling, the last thing the government should ever be doing is recommending assisted dying. They need help. And right now, virtually 90% of our complex cases at Veterans Affairs are mental health cases. So we said this would be a slippery slope that would be very, very dangerous for people with mental health conditions, not just veterans. So I'm glad there's a pause, David, but this shouldn't be an option for someone we can treat.
Well, in fairness, my understanding of this is that this was not something that was being offered by the government intentionally. It appears to have been one rogue employee that they've now referred to the RCMP for criminal investigation. And it seems like the refer to the supervisor is maybe a way to put some guardrails around it. Is that how you view it?
Well, look, it's illegal to even happen now. These changes are not even supposed to happen until March. I've heard the number is more like 8 cases, and there's multiple case workers. So what I'm hearing from veterans, David, is completely different than what the minister is saying. And flagging it for a superior, this is still reinforcing that this is an option. Remember, that veteran, or the 8 veterans that called the assistance line, are usually looking for help of some sort. If MAID comes up in the conversation, whether it's from the agent or from the veteran, it should be, how can we get you help for this treatable condition? Because, you know, I do a lot of work with Romeo Dallaire. He's been in dark spots, got the help he needed, and now he's helping child soldiers around the world. So these are treatable conditions. This should not be treated like a terminal or irremediable physical condition. And this is a warning we've had for many years, and it's sad to see it coming to pass.
Right. So the minister, when he was here last week, their scouring of their records has only turned up 4 cases, and that's 4 too many for Veterans Affairs to be offering this. And it's not on their menu of options. Someone has done this in defiance of policy. But it sounds like you're speaking bigger on this than simply the veterans community. Are you saying this shouldn't be offered to anyone with a mental illness, despite the court orders saying that MAID needs to be expanded?
There was no court order on this, David.
In fact, well, there was a judgment in Quebec, was there not?
The Quebec court said the original legislation from 2016 was a little too restrictive. Mm-hmm. She quoted the speeches I gave in the House on veterans in the judgment in Quebec. The government should have appealed this, David. This will eventually go back to the Supreme Court anyway. The fact that the Attorney General did not refer a lower court decision in Quebec to the Supreme Court, they intervened here, and the Senate intervened. The medical professionals, the veterans community, most mental health professionals, the vast majority, do not want to see this for treatable conditions. You know, Bell Let's Talk, all the great work we've done reducing stigma means we need people to get help, not to be calling a government line and being offered end-of-life care. So there's so much we can do here, and I think the slippery slope is already readily apparent when multiple VAC workers are doing it. And let me add one other thing, David. I talked today to Wounded Warriors Canada. They're being overwhelmed with calls from veterans who no longer trust calling the assistance line after having heard what happened.
But okay, you say there are multiple caseworkers. We don't have that in the public domain with evidence. We do have one. So you say multiple and as many as 8. We have confirmed 1 and up to 4 people being offered this. They referred it to the police, said it never should have happened, and are trying to set up safeguards to make sure it doesn't happen again. So is it really a slippery slope if they're putting that kind of friction on this slope to try to stop it from happening?
In the last few months, David, as I've been speaking about this, as you know, I have a little more time to advocate on important important issues like this. I've heard just today from a case of workers' compensation, someone who happened to be a veteran but was calling a workers' compensation line in Alberta being referred. I had a constituent calling about a pension issue being referred by an agent to consider MAID. You know, having been Veterans Minister, I know how difficult it can be for an agent to deal with someone who's in mental health stress. They don't even understand what MAID is. Oh. Most of the government themselves don't understand. That's why the court in Carter wanted a bright line so that it was someone that was really in a terminal condition, not someone that can be treated. And that's the difference with mental health. It's going to be impossible to properly manage this in a way that is fair.
These cases you're hearing about in other areas, I mean, what are you doing? I know it's not your responsibility, but what are you doing about it in terms of reporting it to the proper authorities, reporting it to police? I mean, obviously, this should not be happening in a call about a pension issue. So what action can you or will you take on this?
I think the very fact that society right now doesn't understand that this is not even allowed now, but the fact that the government's own legislation is going to allow assisted dying, where the state actually takes a role in the end of life for someone with a treatable condition, that is the slippery slope. We warned about it in 2016. I warned about it in 2020 as the Conservative leader, and people said we were just trying to stop the legislation. No, people that have a terminal condition that are near end of life, that's what really the Carter decision said. It said there is a role where the state can play a role with proper safeguards and consent. It's completely different when someone has a treatable condition that could be temporary with the proper treatments. What we need to do, David, ramp up mental health supports, not just for veterans, for vulnerable Canadians. There's higher instances for people that are homeless, that would have depression or mental illness, Indigenous populations. So in the last election, I had a lot of policies on mental health and addiction support. That's what we need to be doing. Provide more housing, provide more mental health supports, ramp up health spending, Prime Minister, to make sure we have more supports at the provincial level, not open this slippery slope that clearly even the minister himself doesn't understand what's happening. And I'll tell you, I trust the veterans and the veterans organizations I hear from on this. And now that we have veterans not willing to call Veterans Affairs, they're calling charities like Wounded Warriors Canada. That should be a red flag.
But I want to circle back to this point. If you've heard yourself from two veterans who have been offered this by various people who do not have the authority to do this, because even if it were legal right now, this is something they have discussed with a doctor, with a medical practitioner, which I'm assuming is not the person at the other end of a pension helpline call. I mean, are you reporting this to people? Who are you telling about this?
I'm talking to, in one case, one of the ministers. I've been flagging this on a public basis, as has the Conservative caucus. I don't want to score political points on this. In fact, I've praised the Veterans Minister when there's been times to. I've criticized him. But the outcry we had years ago about the closure of some offices that weren't being used, we now have Veterans Affairs recommending assisted dying to someone who is calling for inquiring on payments or assistance.
But that is not a departmental policy. Someone went rogue here.
It is in multiple departments, and it is happening because the government even passed these changes through the Senate. This should not happen. You speak to the vast majority of mental health professionals, David. They don't even know how to define this for somebody that has a temporary condition that can be treated. There is no right for the state to end someone's life.
Okay. Just as a final point, this was supposed to come into force. The expansion of this to people with irremediable mental illness was supposed to come into force in the middle of March. They're going to negotiate an extension because the medical profession, the psychiatric profession, want to make sure there's just clarity on how all of this works to avoid slippery slope and problems. I mean, what do you think they need? How much longer do you think they should delay it? And what are the big things you think they need to get done?
Well, I'm glad Minister Lametti finally listened. If you actually look at most of these MAID changes, they were made well after court-imposed timelines. They were last minute. That's what's happening again here. The committee's not even fully completed their examination. My personal view, having worked on mental health since I left the military, we cannot do this properly for people that have a treatable mental health condition. And it will lead to errors. And I think it's the same reason I'm against the death penalty. One error is too much. And so I think most Canadians are very comfortable with someone with terminal cancer or with ALS or a condition like that, having dignity in dying. That was the origin of the debate going back to Sue Rodriguez. Now this is sliding out of control. Most health professionals are very uncomfortable. You have entire hospital psychiatric boards refusing to go forward if this moves. So we've got more time, but I think this is a chance to look at, let's increase housing supports, mental health supports. Let's recruit more mental health professionals to help people not open up this very slippery slope of a MAID option for mental health.
Okay, Erin O'Toole, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, David.
Conservative MP, former Veterans Affairs Minister, and former Conservative leader, Erin O'Toole.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.